Welcome to Earth, a love story. I'm your host, Robin Lassiter. This week on the podcast, I speak to my very dear friend, Yoni Shadmi. He's been on the podcast a couple of times before, and Yoni lives in Israel. We've been keeping in close touch over the past couple of weeks as the situation there unfolds, and honestly, we keep in close touch all the time anyway. It is more tender now. I'm concerned for my friend. I was really grateful that he wanted to have this conversation. I think it's extremely valuable for all of us to hear how he's framing things, to hear how things are. And in preparation for this conversation, I want to read something that I wrote a few weeks ago. I wrote this before the events that are unfolding in Israel began, and it's more lighthearted than this moment in time deserves. And I'm sitting with the grief. And what I wrote is still true for me, and maybe for you too. Us against them versus we are them. The wild thing about what is going on in the world right now, with the right versus the left, blue versus red, conspiracy theory versus rationality, woo versus mainstream, etc., 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 is that they, whoever they are to you and where you are oriented, think that we, whoever we are and where we are oriented, don't know what's really going on. That we each have a view of a correct, real, and undeniable reality, and that the other side is stupid, uninformed, malicious, dangerous, and misled. And there is no way that I've seen to convince one side that the other is wrong, or right for that matter. This is what Naomi Klein talks about in her book Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World. Listening to a conversation with her talking about her book, and my recent conversation with Samantha Brooks is what brought all of these thoughts up this morning. I don't have any big answers for solving any of this, and I'm not going to dive into the political arena trying to convince anyone of anything. Don't worry. I know by now that reality is real for each of us, and is different for each of us. There is a there out there, I'm pretty sure. And also all of our particular lenses color that there almost completely. Our beliefs, our past, our traumas, our family cultures growing up, the media bubbles that we immerse ourselves in, and what meaning we make of it all are overlaid onto the there out there, so that we end up with two people having the same experiences and coming out with vastly different memories and interpretations of the same event. Want proof of this on a small scale? Next time you're with your family, ask them about a particular memory from earlier in life where everyone was involved. If you all come up with the same exact recollection of that experience, look a little deeper. Ask a couple more questions. I would be astonished if you didn't find discrepancies in the story. And don't get me started on memory itself. How it's been proven that every time we remember something, it changes slightly to conform to the story that we've told ourselves around it. These questions and many others can bring us to the edge of what the fuck is reality and how do we navigate it. Just look at the Mandela effect. I've had my own experiences with this. Certain that I experienced reality one way, but when I go to the all-knowing Google to confirm, I find that I am simply wrong. And a bunch of other people are wrong with me. Some folks remember the past one way, and other groups remember it a different way. What can be the meaning of this? If we take our experiences seriously, which is a touchstone of my work, take it seriously and hold it lightly, we tend to start taking other people's experiences seriously as well. Once we believe ourselves, it is easier to believe others, even if we just believe that they believe what they believe. All of this serves to bring us closer to a new and weird ontology, especially if we've been immersed in and served by consensus reality for most of our lives. It's easier when consensus reality wasn't ever super solid to begin with, or didn't ever serve us or work for us anyway. Think experiencers, people who've seen ETs, UFOs, had prophetic dreams, mystical experiences, seen ghosts, people who've undergone reality-shattering trauma, shock, or loss, huge groups of people who are not served by the systems in place, impoverished, BIPOC, queer, neurodivergent, or otherwise unheld, uncentered folks. It's easier to see the world behind the world and all of its multi-layered realities, from the mundane to the supernatural, if consensus reality wasn't ever really working for us anyway. I think this is where it's easy to start to wonder if we're in a simulation, wonder what the fuck is actually going on around here. Or we just double down on our version of reality and make sure we're comforted by being right, by being in the know, safe in our certainty that our reality is the real one and that everyone else is a fucking idiot. Maybe, though, there's a secret third option, an option that lives in the land of paradox, and both and bring it in instead of kick it out. Maybe reality is both objective and subjective. Maybe this place is like a simulation, a honeycomb matrix, and maybe that doesn't make it any less real. Maybe, as Morpheus says when Neo asks, "But wait, I thought the matrix wasn't real," the mind makes it real. So this is the real world, and it also seems to shift based on where we place our attention and the quality of that attention, as the Four Who Are One have said. And the way they delivered that didn't feel at all like it was just true for me. It felt like that's how it is for everyone. And if that's the case, then we are both living in an objective reality and a subjective reality that shifts and responds to each of us individually. All of that to say, we're all living in our own realities that are no more and no less real than anyone else's reality. So this fighting over who is right, who is wrong, is pretty useless. Ultimately, if what all the spiritual teachers say is true, and stay with me here, we're all just one thing, right? And that means that this mirror world of the quote-unquote other that we're witnessing is part of us too. We are each other's shadows, each other's mirrors. We are each holding an unseen, unloved, unwanted, unacknowledged piece of the other. We hold each other's dark shadows and golden shadows. Anyone who has ever done shadow work and been horrified/astonished to see themselves in the person that drives them the most batshit crazy knows what I'm talking about. That happened with me in my two most recent relationships, and I can feel that there is still some work to do there because I feel some activation around it just talking about it. In the first of these relationships, it was just a shit show of blame and shame and spiraling and finger pointing and trauma and despair. It was, you are wounded and need to get your shit together, and I would never treat me the way that you're treating me. And him saying, you're the one who needs to get her shit together. You're the one who treats me like shit, and if you would just accept me as I am, and me saying, no, you accept me as I am. The second relationship was a healing ground for lifetimes of that cycle, and lots of painful realizations. One of the most hilarious and most tender and shocking was that in this second relationship, I had labeled him as avoidant attached and me as anxiously attached. So a lot more conscious and kindness around these patterns. We were really trying. And then I realized one day with a sick rolling stomach that, oh fuck, I actually have a disorganized attachment style, which means I was both avoidant and anxious. So that when he finally came close to me, I pushed him away. And what a mind fuck that was for him. And I have to say that since those days, I've come to understand a more nuanced idea of attachment styles, thanks to the work of Dr. Scott Lyons and others, that we are all actually somewhere on the spectrum of securely attached and insecurely attached, and that it can change based on the kind of relationship we're in, or even if we're resourced on a particular day or not. So massive compassion for all of us on these edgy fronts, figuring out how to human together through this messy time on the planet. At that time, though, with that realization of a disorganized attachment style, which is, I assure you, the worst one, so much so that many books and lots of research just skip it altogether because it's so confusing and difficult to deal with, Lots of thanks here to Diane Poole Heller for including that in her book so lovingly and helping to bring it out of the Shadowlands. But at that time, I realized that I was the thing in part that I had labeled him. And when I realized that, something in me broke, and I stopped pointing the finger and just lived in the confusion. Through acknowledging that, though, and seeing my shadow, which is 80% of the work in shadow work after all, it was brought into the light and healed and integrated, and I stopped projecting those qualities onto him, and I owned my shit. And he went through his own process with that. I saw all of the ways I was projecting both my own unloved and unclaimed dark and golden shadow qualities onto him, and that changed everything. I also saw the ways that he labeled me that were his own projections. I worked through those as well, and those that weren't true, those that were placed on me and didn't actually belong to me but came from his own unhealed stuff, I gave back and let go of. I stopped internalizing the ways that other people saw me that just weren't true. This is all incredibly deep and tricky work, and it is only with the help of wonderful teachers that I was able to navigate it all. But it does work. Shadow work is real, and it can free up so much tied up energy from our psyches. And then we can use that energy to improve our health, or go on crazy OBE journeys, or write books, or practice lucid dreaming, or just finally rest. Or maybe learn to help other people. And it offers another gift, that of massive compassion. When we stop separating ourselves from the other and see that we are mirrors, when we see that it is a big we instead of an either or, this huge love rushes in, and what the Buddhists call bodhicitta is activated. The wisdom that arises from compassion, the wish to reduce suffering, and that wish in action. So yeah, that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying that they are a mirror of us, and we are a mirror of them. Shadow work, baby, but on a vast collective, political, cultural, global scale. It's not us or them. It's us and them. We. Fighting over which reality is real is going to get real old, real fast as we watch the world burn around us. If we don't remember we belong to each other, that we are each other, we're going to be in a world of shit that we can't even imagine. The medicine, the balm, the fix is to be courageous enough to let reality expand to include more, not less. Let compassion arise as we realize that we are truly all in it together. Do our own personal shadow work. Become safe for ourselves, then for the room, then for the world. And then we can all rise up together and eat the rich. Just kidding. They are us too. Let's love ourselves back to wholeness instead.
There's this expectation, which is in a way wonderful and really sensitive, that because there's a war, then people kind of tiptoe around you. And sometimes it's appropriate. But I wonder, like, you're a person who kind of takes care of people. I mean, that's part of who you are. And I think my kind of unprofessional experience with this is that many times the best approach is actually not that kind of, oh, what have you been through, that kind of thing.
I will freely admit that I don't know the best approach. I don't know what the best thing is to do. All that I know is that for whatever reason, going through a grief that finally, broke me down to the floor. I hit whatever rock bottom I hit. I'm sure that there are others that I just haven't experienced yet, but that grief brought me to a place where I'm just unafraid of suffering. And so my only tactic with suffering is not to be afraid of it and to be with it and to not be afraid of people who are suffering and show up and probably do it wrong or whatever, but I'm not gonna
No.
I'm not gonna I used to avoid it. Like, I don't want to go to the funeral. I don't know what to say to my family member who's really struggling. So I'm just not going to say anything because it was more about
Hmm.
me. And now it's like,
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is, but I'm going to be here with it, you know?
I think fearlessness sounds really true. And there's a lot of when you go to someone and you kind of with pity in your eyes, and it's a lot about our fear from their grief.
Yes.
Whereas coming to someone like with good eyes and just basic warmth and letting them have the floor, that requires, yeah, kind of fearlessness of grief, of, okay, where you're at, like I'm fine with it. That's maybe more mature.
Mm. I don't know. I'm settling in still. I'm settling in still.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There's this description, the aliens have a description of Earth as mostly harmless.
Mm.
So I'm thinking that that can be a description of humans still settling in,
Yeah.
still kind. We're still kind of new here.
Right.
Like we're still, um,
Still trying to figure out what the fuck. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I think my only thought for today was to let it be really spacious and
Mm.
that it can be slow if necessary, and to uh I do, that is innate within me, that I want to center the most vulnerable parts of everyone always, so whoever that is today and whatever those parts are today, I want to center that so we can take care of ourselves that way and each other that way, and then kind of give you the floor, I guess, and see where you want to start. Or if it's better for your parts, then I can kind of lead and take over and provide framework. So, really, whatever is best for you.
Okay. Thank you. Um, yeah, it's kind of chaotic, like in my mind. I don't know if just the war or just the usual chaos. I
Mm.
mean, a little bit it's the war for sure. There's all sorts of things that's going on with me. I think just to kind of establish some kind of framework, because I was thinking before we started talking, like what's coming up right now. And it's nice too. This is like the second week of the war. We're in the middle of the second week recording it. So it gave me a chance to kind of go back and kind of think, how did this start? Like for me. So we can start there.
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds good.
Oh, hmm. Okay. Okay. So I'm kind of going back like a week and a half. It's not that far away. So yeah, it was Saturday. And as you know, I'm divorced and I had my two girls with me. Zoal is 6 and Yarden is 5. And they woke up very unusually. They woke up they woke up before me and they went to the living room alone, which is something, it's like the dream of dreams. Finally, they don't kind of jump on me and for that morning. And they went. And then and I was awake in bed and I was really relishing, really enjoying just lying there before the day starts, having this time for myself. And then the siren started. So there are sirens here whenever like there are rockets or missiles incoming, and it's this amazing sound. It's like the trumpets in the desert or something. This, and it's like it seemingly comes from nowhere and everywhere, and it has this really, we talked about it, this haunting quality to it. So I'm lying there and then I heard it and then so immediately I get up and I go to the living room and immediately one thing that's wonderful for me about kids is that you have to be relaxed and cool for them. So you're relaxed and cool. It's not because you have someone to. So I'm coming like with not a smile, maybe half a smile, and saying, "Oh yeah, girls, let's go to the." They know we have every new building in Israel has to have a safe room where it's. I don't know exactly what they're doing. It's like, but it's against rockets and chemical attacks and nuclear attacks. It's reinforced concrete or whatever. Um, and that's where you're supposed to go when you hear the siren. And if you don't have that, you go to the bomb shelter. So we went there, and it's the room where they sleep in anyway. It's not like an extra room. That's where they sleep, even when it's not wartime. So it's a nice room, one of my favorite rooms here, um, of the 3.5 rooms. But yeah, it's definitely one of the top. So we went there, and we were there, and my first thought was, yeah, there are, every couple of either years or months, there's like a small, quote unquote, compared to this small war with either Gaza or Lebanon. And I was thinking, yeah, this is what's going on. And we went there, and we were there, and they were pretty cool. The girls were pretty cool. And then, yeah, and I had the phone with me, so I opened the phone to see what's going on. And then those first 2 days, they were all kind of just everyone was shocked because, like, if people don't know the way that it started, I mean, it started way before that, arguably either like 100 years ago or 2,000 years ago, or whenever you want to put the starting point. But this particular thing started when Hamas, like the Palestinian organization, they like there's no nice way to put it. They killed 2,000 people, which is way, way, way more than what like the most that ever happened in Israel. 2,000, like most of them civilians, like families, kids. And then for 2 days, like the whole country was just in shock. And the way that I experienced it was through Twitter, basically. The girls were with me. I was updating through Twitter. I didn't want to watch TV. And yeah, you're just kind of shocked. You're just kind of shocked at first.
Yeah, I'm struck by things that are not common for me, right? Things that are different, very different in my life than your life, which is having a room in the house that's sort of a safe room because of this presence that, something could happen, enough so that new construction has to have this room put into it. And how it sounds like the way that you're describing it, that it's pretty normalized in your life.
Mm.
This is a pretty normal thing. I wonder if that's true. Like, is it something that's on your mind a lot? Is it just a normal part of life? Do you feel tension around these borders and edges and potentials for threat and disruption all the time? Or is it just a normal part of life up until this point?
Hmm. Well, like I'm well aware that in Gaza they don't have such rooms. Like they're also being bombed by us, and they don't have such rooms. And that room, when you stop to think about it, is kind of nuts because it has like this box um, for chemical warfare, and then another box for nuclear warfare, and it can be completely shut down from the world, and it has these air filters, but you don't think about it. No, you don't think, like, again, it's a girls' room, so like the nuclear warfare box is covered by, I got this nice scarf, I guess, like Indian scarf. I'm sure that's like a shawl or however you call it. It's kind of colorful, and so it's covered. And there's this super heavy door. It has like a really heavy door, so that's kind of open all the time, and it has like the girls kind of put drawings on it and stuff like that. So it's really normalized, and in a way that's good, and it's very human to do, right? And certainly I wouldn't want the girls to be kind of burdened too much with it, but in a way that's also, I think we're seeing is that it helps you repress the reality. It helps you repress the existence of the Palestinians, the conflict. Because you just normalize it like humans do, and you don't think about it until that stuff happens. And like the stuff with the door, for example, there was a lot, like the difference between life and death for people who encountered Hamas was that door. Was they able to lock that door? And there are horrible stories of people who were locked like for a day, basically. The military didn't get to them, and they're hearing like the Hamas people going around shooting stuff, shouting to them, open the door, open the door, open the window. There's also like a really heavy steel window. So yeah, and the door, my door, it was kind of faulty. It didn't fully close. And I had a whole thing here with a technician to make sure, after a few days of fighting, to make sure that, if someone comes in here, to make sure that the door is fully closed. And again, I want to say, and not in a defensive way, but other people have it much, much worse, like the Palestinians and just people who don't live in new buildings, for example, Israeli people. That's also, and what they do, because you don't have enough time to go to the bomb shelter sometimes, and you're supposed to go to the, how do you call the space between apartments? Yeah, where the stairs are. So you have all these scenes where people who are in the middle of the shower or whatever they're doing just go to and everybody meets there. So yeah, that's what it's like.
Mm-hmm. So you and I have talked about this quite a lot, like how, what to do with all of this, from like personally, because you're my very good friend who I love very much, and I don't know what's going on over there, and I don't have a sense of how far you are from things, and so I feel a tremendous amount of like protectiveness and fear, and I want to stay close to the reality of the suffering and the horror, because it grounds me with you and humans. Like I don't want to get too kind of meta or universal about things. And so that's one aspect where I want to stay close to the reality of what's happening. And then another aspect of me can't help but see things from a universal kind of standpoint or a very high view. And that part of me is saying that not to the same level of intensity, but what you're describing is something that we all do. We all have sort of decorated the horrors or the reminders that the world is on fire. We keep it at a distance. We stay, it's been normalized in our lives that these horrible things happen, and that there are real problems that could sort of erupt at any moment. I think about that in the United States with like school shootings and this simmering beneath the surface kind of tension that is terrifyingly in the shadows. Like it's not out in the light much. And that, in order to go on with life, we have to normalize it, and we have to not be with it every single day. So those are the two kind of perspectives that I go back and forth between, trying to not numb away from feeling real fear, and like I don't want to turn away from it. And also seeing the universal thing playing out here, which is that these things are happening all over the world to varying degrees. And what I arrive at is just suffering. It's like, there's just fucking suffering. And what are we doing? What are we doing? So that's the universal view that isn't deeply connected to the personal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I actually have a question because, like I said, we're in the middle of the second week of the war. And the first week, I was able to, through your training, by the way, thank you for that. I think I was able to kind of stay on a personal level, just the right amount of connected. Like I was with the girls throughout the day, checking the phone and going through a lot, hearing the news, speaking with people, and then at night kind of crying a little bit. And I felt kind of connected. And then these last few days, I feel like I kind of lost the script. I lost the connection. Um, and I guess my question is around maintaining that, which is maintaining kind of discipline. I don't know if that's exactly the right word, but there's something in us that really dislikes this state, although it feels like the natural human state is to be kind of connected, right? And connect and then not disconnect, but like you said, the universal view, but it takes so much effort, so much fucking work. So how do we approach it, especially like, let's say, at emergency times? Doesn't have to be a war, but
I think that I don't know if this is true or not, but I think that all bets are off during emergency times. The way that I'm processing things from here in a much more relatively safe place, I have the luxury of like turning towards the hard thing and exploring in my mind these different views and trying to find what feels the most helpful from here, basically, like the most helpful and effective from a distance. I think if you're right up next to it, I think that, I don't know that the appropriate thing is to be connected all the time. It seems like in order for the human system to survive, like the human body, mind, psyche, like that's why disassociation exists, right? Is to give the system a break from the intensity. So, yeah, I don't know if there's a should for people who are in emergency. The only thing I can think of is when my dad had a heart attack earlier in the year, and he's fine now. And it was like the best case scenario if somebody has a heart attack. So it all ended up well. But my nervous system went into complete and total overload, the shock, fight or flight, freeze. I got sick, like it all happened. I was not connected. I was unsafe for other people to be around, and I was a hot fucking mess. And so maybe there are some people who don't. I'm sure that there are. I've seen people respond to things more gracefully than that, but it was not an appropriate moment for me to like. I don't know if it was appropriate or not, right? I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do this, but it wasn't, I did not have the capacity to stay connected during that time, during that emergency time. Yeah.
Thank you. My question is, like, when you first said emergencies, and I thought of like a breakup. After breakups, I kind of allow myself to order kind of takeaway junk food and watch a lot of TV and stuff like that. But I think, well, I guess my question around it is, like you said, first of all, is this real? How much of an emergency is this for me? Like how big is the impact on my life? And another way to put this question is, I think part of the things that got us where we are, either as Israelis, as humankind, is kind of spoiling ourselves with the emergency thing. Saying, like, for example, there are emergency laws that are in effect in Israel for 75 years. And you always have this thing where you can say, well, you know what, this is an emergency. We don't have to engage with it. We're all post-traumatic here. And then kind of use it as a license to like not only not wake up, but also bring the next trauma. Because when you're not awakened, when you're asleep, bad stuff happens to you, like on a personal level and also on a national level. So how do you know? I mean, I know there's no one answer for this, but like, let's put it in the extreme way. Shouldn't we always be striving to be alive and waking up and connected?
I think that all of that is an incredibly mature and sort of high level thinking in the middle of things like this. I feel like asking you that question because you
That's not fair.
you brought it forward. I'll answer it, but then I want to hear your answer. I don't know the answer, but in my world, in my life, that is what I'm striving for. Yes, I would say yes. Yeah, if we don't figure out how to do something different, then nothing is ever going to change. I think that approaching, how, like, the question of what do we do about this? Who's right and who's wrong and who started it? And when is retribution enough? Like, when is the, like, who gets to take the last blow that'll make everything finally okay? Um, Seems like an insane path that is never going to lead anywhere good. So the only way that I see that we, meaning humanity, gets out of this is through waking up, through a awakening more and more, and developing greater access and capacity to consciousness and to that part of us that is good and has integrity and is connected to love beyond all borders and beyond all circumstances, even. I think that that's the only way forward. I also know, and this example is like a small parallel comparison to what's happening. But for example, if you tell someone, actually, it's not, I won't, that is not true. I don't like to
belittle.
Yeah, like I don't like to compare suffering and saying, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like there are certain degrees of it, but suffering is suffering. And so, for example, someone who is in an abusive relationship and finally, is maybe thinking of leaving or just was able to get out of it or is still in it. And you say to them, you and this person had a soul contract to come in and experience this together. It's probably because of your karma. And karma's not good or bad, but that's probably what it is, you came in, you had to experience this. It's going to make you grow and change and be a better person. And you're going to learn about boundaries and about what's okay and what's not okay. So ultimately, it's a really positive thing. Like, that is the most damaging thing to say to somebody who's in the midst of suffering. So
Yeah.
I have to speak to the relative situation and to where people are. And my answer from my seat in this very safe place is that yes, like, we have to figure out how to access a bigger perspective and a truer alignment with love and consciousness. And I would not tell that to someone who was in the midst of tremendous suffering. That's not the appropriate time for that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. And it brings up two things. One is a Talmudic dark story, a Talmudic passage about there's a sage called Hillel, and he walks by the Jordan and he sees a skull, like a human skull. And he says, you've been drowned because you've drowned others, and those who have drowned you shall drown as well, which is like I guess it's the death cycle or the karma cycle.
Mm-hmm.
That's one, that's one response. And then I was kind of, as you were talking, I was kind of imagining this perfect teacher who's like both maternal and paternal. And she's still a woman, like in my mind, the way that she looks, but and she would approach, let's say, something like this with like great softness and tenderness, but also resolve. And I don't know if the word is to be demanding of people, but it seems like with prophets and stuff that there's this that you can kind of that you have two kinds. There's this, maternal or paternal angry prophets that kind of get off your butts and do something. And then there's like the softer versions of, okay, I'm supporting you now. And if there was this person where they could do both at the same time, kind of this perfect pairing that really sees your suffering and really sees what you're going through, but if that's the right thing, also insists on you taking the next step, whatever that may be.
Mm. I I want to call in that archetype. You know, that's a good archetype to hold, to call forward into ourselves and into the collective as the perfect teacher. Like maybe we need that perfect teacher right now who can do both. I mean, there's so many themes in there, you know, the combination of the masculine and feminine, the union of the masculine and feminine, and the ability to hold both, right? Because it's a paradox. So the ability to hold both of those things and have the wisdom to apply what is necessary at the right time. You and I talk a lot about developing relationships with internal guides or external, you know, they may be part of us or they may be other entities. And I mean, for me personally, that one's like ringing out. It's like, yeah, let's call them in. Yeah. So you may have, I think you kind of answered this question with all of that, but do you have an answer to that about, you know, how to be in an emergency? Like, do you have an idea of what should be done or what needs to be done in order for this kind of thing that you're experiencing or your country is experiencing, that people close to you are experiencing, so that it doesn't continue forever? Or more personally, like what do you do with this?
Well, the response here has been very interesting. Very interesting. There was the shock, like I said, the first, certainly a few hours, but then a few days. And a major part of the shock was the military failure. Like the fact that the feelings that we're naked, that we're not protected in our homes by what's supposed to be like great military and a great intelligence apparatus. That trust was completely broken. And then what happened was that while the state was crumbling, that not just the military, just social services, education, everything seems to, and still is in a really bad state on a national level. The government, it's not just that they were taken by surprise, it's that this kind of exposed a deep, deep rot in the state apparatus, all like health, everything. And then there was just immediately, seeming immediately, those first few hours, a civic response. Very, very impressive. Led by the same organizations that were kind of protesting the Prime Minister Netanyahu, they just mobilized in a way that is kind of unprecedented, I think, in Israel. And I know there are now all sorts of dignitaries visiting Israel, President Biden and others, and that's where they're going. They're going to these civic organizations that just started taking care of everything, like the people who were evacuated, and mental health, and food, and shelter, and education, and everything 100% volunteer and 100% like funded by donations and stuff. And it's kind of trying to replace the states because there's nothing else there. And honestly, I wasn't much of a part of that response. Like I donated a little bit. I went to one of these centers and helped a little bit. I went with the girls, if I'm honest, for them also to see it. And they kind of painted some stuff for families who were evacuated. So that was very impressive. And I found myself in the sidelines of that response. And another part of it was a mobilization for the military. Like Israel is 9 million people. And right now on the border of Gaza, there are, according to what's being published, there are like more than 300,000 reserve troops. Like people like my brother came all the way. He was on a trip in Italy with his family and immediately left everything, got on a plane. As he landed, changed into uniform and went immediately to Gaza. And as I was hearing all that, I was quite passive. I was with the girls, like with my brother when we kind of texted that he landed. I was kind of looking at myself from the side, and I was literally in the kitchen, cleaning the kitchen and kind of taking care of the girls in my nice apartment. And my feelings around it, as it went through my body, were actually actually quite okay. Like I'm full of awe and inspiration by the people who are doing this stuff. And I thank God that they're there. But also, uh, this immediate spring into action, I would like to add some sort of reflection to it as well, which is what we talked about, some sort of digestion of what happened. And I get the counter argument that, okay, you can digest until tomorrow, but there are fucking kids out there who lost their homes, lost their parents. Someone needs to take care of them. And I think those two things are correct. And the things that happens in Israel usually, and maybe in the world, is that the reflection part gets lost. And like not just reflection, just the full internalization of what's going on. And I guess that's what I would like to be added to this very impressive reaction, instant reaction.
First, thank you for sharing all of that. It's, I think in lots of situations like this, particularly that happen on the other side of the world, like people have no idea what it's actually like. What people are going through, what day-to-day stuff is happening. We don't get a clear view. We get the news just brings the horror, which needs to be seen, but we don't get the complexity. We don't get the nuance. We don't get how people are responding. So it's really helpful to see that, to have some understanding of that. This is my reflection on that, and you can tell me if it feels like I'm catching what you're saying correctly. I'm seeing it here too. I'm seeing it here. There's this knee-jerk reaction to either say, I stand with Israel, or Israel's done terrible things to the Palestinians, and this is what happens, and so I stand with Gaza, or maybe a slightly more spacious and mature view is people say, I stand with the children, or I stand with the families or something like that. And there's a real kind of social pressure to pick a side and to feel like you have to do something for that, even if it's just post on social media or condemn something. Like I'm going to condemn that side, or I'm going to condemn this side or whatever. And stopping and holding that tension, which is to me what it feels like you're talking about. Like I'm just going to I'm going to hold the tension. I'm going to be with the unanswerable question, and I'm going to go slow. It feels edgy for lots of reasons. Part of it is like, how am I going to be judged for this? Will people think X, Y, Z? Should I be doing these things? If I'm not joining this, will I be seen this way? Will I be seen that way? It's a quiet response that is not easy to put into like a Twitter blurb or, a meme or something like that. It's a much more complex and nuanced reaction to hold that tension. And it feels connected to what I was talking about before in terms of accessing some different level of consciousness. The sort of denial of the either or, and entering into the land of paradox, which is both and trying to get in touch with something that is beyond the body reaction, like beyond the fight or flight or freeze, and not that we shouldn't have those reactions. Even me, who I'm connected mostly to this through you, because I have emotional connections to you. Otherwise, it would be this horrific thing that happened across the world that I would still feel great compassion for, but I wouldn't. I'm feeling it through the web of our connection.
It's really good, and I'm reminded of the voice messages we exchanged when I was kind of wondering how come people care so much. Like, I have to admit, I don't care so much about those sorts of things on the other side of the world, like something very big like Ukraine that's in the news. But and I just want to affirm, just as an Israeli, for what it's worth, that I think it's very valuable to what you described, to be able to just be sad with this thing or whatever arises, that in itself, I feel, connects you to some sort of web or network. Network in the sense of like fungi are a network of humans. That in itself is a lot, And it's in many ways, I think, it's more difficult than action. It's more difficult than taking a so-called clear stance on things. Although that's sometimes also valuable and needed for sure. But even then, I would expect it to come after this moment of connecting on a body level to what's going on and not being destroyed by it, and also not rejecting it.
Right.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, it reminded me that's what I was going to say. Like, of course, anger is going to come up. Of course, rage and deep sorrow and fear and all of those things. Like, we don't want to suppress those things. The natural human animal reaction to something like this going on. And also, do I want to make a decision from that place? And I'm not, again, I don't have a direct, obviously, like one-to-one example that I can draw from. But for me, like activism, protests, people in the streets, fighting against the thing, right? Like fighting against the corrupt government or fighting against the systems of oppression. Absolutely 1,000,000% necessary. Like somebody's got to go do that. I completely believe that. And this is my like personal edgy thing, is that person is not me. I am not the person to go do that. I'm doing something else. And it has to do with holding that tension. And it doesn't holding the tension and being with the body and letting things run through and settle. There's no quick, flashy way to make that consumable to the masses. You know what I mean? There's no, like, our whole system is about commodifying or, something really quickly, like alchemizing it into action or some consumable as fast as possible. And sitting with the tension it defies that. And so to me, it feels sort of like a vulnerable, naked, edgy, lonely place, because you're not part of the big group, seemingly the big group that's going out and doing the thing.
Wow, that really led me to an emotional response here. Really, wow. Okay. Like I told myself in advance that I want to be aware of those emotions. I want to be, let them rise, but still stick to what's appropriate for this podcast, let's say. But yeah, that gave me an emotional response, and I'll tell you why. I think one of the reasons we are where we are is that there are two meetings that Israelis haven't really taken upon themselves. One is with the Palestinians, and the other is with the land, the physical land. And there have been, like, in better years with the Palestinians, there have been these programs. I've been part of these programs actually, where you're meeting Palestinians in sort of neutral or even beautiful environments, and you're talking. But it hasn't really happened. I don't think it happens with the left. I don't think it happens with the settlers. We haven't really landed where we are yet. And I think meetings are not, I'm not saying it in a necessarily lovey-dovey way. Meetings are inherently surprising. Like, if we meet the Palestinians, it doesn't mean that peace will come. And the reason I was getting emotional is that with this horrific event, that Saturday, that's a kind of meeting. That's a kind of meeting. To have people come into your home and kill your kids, that's a kind of meeting. And I was reminded, like, there's a 20th century rabbi. He's the translator of the Talmud. The Talmud is written, it's not written in Hebrew, it's written in Aramaic. And he translated it to Hebrew, and it's an important step. But He said it about the Holocaust. He said, well, if you've been through the Holocaust, or if you know about the Holocaust and you haven't questioned your religion, and he's very religious, then you haven't really met the thing. And you know, when you talk in this podcast a lot about the huge difficulty of meeting something, like there's a lot of teachers that you hear saying, oh, you know, be in the moment, meet the current moment, meet whatever rises. And it's true. But, you know, in my small personal experience, in these last few years, when you try to do it, really difficult things start to come up. And there's like a whole package of support that's needed for those sorts of meetings to take place, either like personally or on a national level.
That's that's profound. I can feel that. I don't know that there's a natural path through this. And by this, I mean becoming more human and becoming more conscious kind of at the same time, like becoming our human animal selves and also the best and clearest version of ourselves in terms of love and consciousness and wisdom. I don't know if there's a natural path through that, but the path that has emerged for me is that at some point we need community, and we need that support you're talking about, the real community full of people that have also met themselves. Like even just meeting ourselves is the word that wants to come out is shattering. Like we meet ourselves or we meet another. And if we meet nakedly, there's a shattering that happens. And we need a container for that. And my work is helping people build a container, their own container, so that they can hold themselves and expand capacity so that they can hold more and more and more of themselves. And at some point, we need a community to hold each other. There needs to be that container that happens. And I don't know how we do that. I think it's just emerging as sort of a next spiritual evolutionary step in this certain collective that I'm a part of and people I talk to is like, okay, how do we now do this inside of community?
Yeah. I'm reminded of some of the other podcast episodes and our conversations about the idea of that have to do with, maybe this is sort of my wording, but with the others, kind of the meeting with others, or sometimes they're called aliens, and then getting those messages from them, and the thing that kind of that I want for them to learn, or for the teachers to learn, is this support package. Is this thing you said, the community, and we can, you know, make a list. A lot of things are needed for the meeting with the now and the self and then the other. And I feel like you're doing that kind of work, of that kind of very grounded work of, yeah, of appreciating the difficulty of the, let's say, inner child, to do that meeting, and also appreciating or being aware of the unbelievable lengths we humans would go to avoid that meeting.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a paradox that just arose in my mind, because why does meeting the inner child or meeting, you know, non-human intelligence, the other, the, you know, alien, and we could go on and on, like you said, like I could make a list of all these meetings. Why does that feel like death? Why is there a part of us that just feels like I'm going to, like, it's like approaching death, and it's strange. Like, I'm thinking about that passage in my book where I met this rejected part of myself, you know, that she was just holding all of the betrayals, all of the things that I pushed down. And I didn't know what else to do finally but turn towards her. And she, like, I knew I would die. I knew I would be obliterated. And yeah, that's why all of this work is training for death, which is the weirdest thing to say. Like, unless you have any fucking idea what I'm talking about, you'll think that that's a crazy statement. I'm not saying you, because I know you know exactly what I'm talking about. But somebody would go, what are you talking about? Why does this all have to do with death? It's like these little annihilations, these small shatterings, hopefully within a container. Because if you're shattering outside of a container, it's um, not helpful. It's not, it's just more trauma, more pain, more coming apart. But if there's a breaking open that happens inside of a container, it is all death training. It's training for death. And I wonder if we go to these links to avoid these things because we are no longer connected to nature, which is right up against death every single day. And it's an absolutely natural part of life. And then I would say, realizing the truth as we go through each of these shatterings and integrations, that we die but don't die. And maybe that's what all of death training is about. That's like, we get shattered, we don't die. We die but don't die. We meet this thing that is going to annihilate us, and we do get annihilated. We do die, but we don't die. And so all of this to me is death training, which is so weird. Like meeting the inner child as death training. It's like, yeah, yep. And I think that I'm having this thought for the first time because of what you've brought forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Like nature for me, like one of the things that nature is like a support mechanism. I like to think about things as support. So like community support, nature is support, and it's true that we're disconnected from that. And what you just said, if someone if someone external or internal could communicate that to us, that would be the ultimate support mechanism. If we could be convinced that death isn't death, that would be a huge help. Like if any alien is hearing it or whoever, that would be a huge help. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my mind wants to say very quickly, and normally I kind of sit with those things, but I think I'm going to say it because I actually know in my body that it's true, that is the actual disclosure. Disclosure is not about that we're not alone. Disclosure is actually about that we die but don't die. And that for whatever bizarre reason, experiencers, people who have near-death experiences, which is often people who have these experiences, there's often a trauma involved, a breaking open, a splitting open, and then this other thing is revealed. And imagine what the world would be like if we weren't terrified of death. It would be, talk about governments failing, and we would turn away from it. We would turn away, and we would do something else.
Less anxious for sure.
Yeah.
Like everything wouldn't be as dramatic. It would be like, okay, so this life, okay, I guess this life has a problem. Let's see the next life. That would be nice. It would just put the pressure off things because It's not this one-time thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also then what do we, like, why be alive at all if we're already dead? If we have this, if we continue, why come to Earth if we die but don't die? Why incarnate? Why have this life? Why do we do it if that's true? And answering that question makes life incredibly, like, it flips for me, instead of it being like, well, it doesn't matter as much, I have 1,000 lives. That absolutely happens, and that happened to me. I was like, oh, this is a many, many, many lifetimes project, so it's all right. Like, it doesn't have to happen like next week. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
that there's
video game, you can always start over.
Yeah. Yes. Right. And that you go through a layer and then it breaks through to another kind of reality. It's like you achieve that level and then there's another kind of reality that happens. Yeah. And there is a release of that pressure with that realization. And then the question of, well, then why do we do this at all? Makes it really, for me, made it really important again. It's like there must be something so important about being embodied and about going through all of this bullshit that makes every moment here, like every second, even though we span lifetimes, it makes every second so meaningful and important. And then the urgency returns. That's why, like, the paradox of death.
Maybe the anxiousness.
Right.
But what was the answer? Why, if you get 1,000 lives, why does every second matter? Small question, yeah.
Yeah. Because something was broken and we are gathering it. We are loving something back into wholeness. And it's an act, it's the act of love contains that urgency, I think. And I want to ask you, like, and maybe this doesn't resonate for you, but if it does resonate, there's a story that you told me actually that's what happened at the beginning of creation or at the beginning of, something was broken.
Yeah. In Kabbalah, it's a big deal, the breaking of the vessels. That there was something in the creation process that kind of broke. And our job in humans is to, like you said, gather all these small pieces, and everything that you do has the potentiality of fixing this little part of, like, an important part of Kabbalah is the fact that you can impact God. Like, it goes both ways. God impacts you and you impact God. And everything that you do, if you make it sacred, then that's the fixing. That's the act. And that's basically the Kabbalist job. And we could kind of infer everyone's job to do this fixing. But I find myself asking, but is even that enough? Even if we had, like, the confirmation about those things, would we meet the Palestinians? Like, there's something about humans that is so, and you can see it in the Torah, in the Old Testament, all the time, that God is so frustrated with that human capacity. Like, you get Sinai, you get God showing up, you get the UFOs landing on the White House lawn. And then a week after, everyone's talking about the Kardashians, or everything's back to normal. And we see it, on a more serious note with Ukraine. And if this war, God forbid, continues, it's going to be in the background. Like, whatever big thing happens, even if it's God himself going down on the mountaintop, like coming down, okay, fine. That was very exciting at the time, but now we go back to our lives. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if there's one thing maybe that can change that.
That's such a good point. That's exactly what happens. I wonder if humans were always that way. I don't know. I mean, I wonder if that's a state of humanness or if that's a state of the world as it is, what I call the machine or the overculture. Like, is it a symptom of the way that we are disconnected from the world, or is it intrinsic to our species?
Like, is there an archaic state where we are able to kind of stay focused on the sacred, on the past?
Right. I keep thinking about David Abrams' book, The Spell of the Sensuous, and his writing and his arguments are so intricate and deep that I am terrible at translating them for the rest of the world. Like,
no,
I just
come on.
It's true.
You're not terrible at it at all. Come on.
We'll just say before there was a time before when the world was not this way. And I'm not saying that it was some sort of paradise. I'm not saying that suffering didn't exist. You could argue it existed, much closer to our lives. Like people died of illnesses and died young, and there was no medication for broken bones, and, there's no pain meds and stuff like that. Like it was likely a very brutal existence with lots of pain and suffering. So I'm not saying that that time was a paradise, or I shall say, and there was a time when we weren't so removed from the nature of the world, from the cycles of life and death. We didn't, I mean, even just the way our brains have changed because we have written language, and we've been abstracting the world for a really long time. We've been abstracting direct experience. So I think that that's the response to God himself comes down and um and my mouth is like, or herself, yes, or herself.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
God comes down, right?
Themselves.
And God themselves come down, and the world keeps going and nothing changes. However, I think that for the people who maybe were standing right there and experienced that, their world did change. It's the experience of life itself that connects us to death and reality and what it feels like, even though I don't know if this is true, but because it's still experience, it's just different. But we've been abstracting experience since we got written language, which is not that long ago. And my example for this is being inside of a horizon line and not having anything else to conceptualize or abstract that reality. That is the entire universe. That's the whole world, is inside of that horizon line. And how little we know about what's on the other side of the horizon, or what's on the side of the horizon behind us. And so experience was right with us. See, I don't know.
Oh yeah, I know. I fully connect to what you said, and it kind of activated a lot of things in me. So let me try like the Jewish version of that, or not the Jewish, my Jewish version of that. So let's say there is an archaic state of appropriateness, um, which sort of in my kind of wording would be turning towards the sacred, being connected to the sacred. And that would be called, like in Judaism, it's called halacha, which is kind of the act of walking, being on the path, let's say. Literally, it's the act of walking, but it's being on the path. And let's say, and part of my motivation here is just trying to save human history, like not to have all like the last 10,000 years be a waste, not have civilization be a mistake, or just a mistake. And in this retelling, yeah, the goddess was reigning for tens of thousands of years, and we spoke about it. That's true academically, historically. Humans, like the first gods, were definitely female that we know of. And then for some reason that needed to end. For some cosmic reason, again, this is a Jewish retelling, you get a very masculine God in the Torah, a very masculine God. And not just masculine, just kind of a teenage masculine, very angry, very jealous, like a lot of conflict with the people, with the Israelites. And that for some reason needed to happen. And then you get civilization. Yeah, you get civilization. You get writing. Like writing was before that, but you get technology. But in the Jewish, let's say, path, so the Torah, the Torah of the male God was written down about 2,600 years ago, based on oral stories. And then, like, just a little more than 1,000 years later, you get the Talmud, which was written like around 500 AD. And the Talmud is not like the Torah at all. It's very different. It's basically people, a lot of different people, all of them men, we should say, but for that stage, it's advanced, kind of describing what they're going through their everyday life and arguing about it and kind of being friends and then separating. And the Talmud is much more wild. It's wild. It's crazy. You can't abstract it. There's almost no abstractions in the Talmud. That's like a common misconception. People think because Jews are good in math or whatever, or good lawyers, it's because they study the Talmud. But the Talmud is great. It's like a book of legends. It's and legends and law and fairy tales, a lot of different things. So already you get a softening. Already you get a softening from the hardcore Torah. The Torah, the Old Testament, everyone knows. It's like you'd have the two brothers, one of them throwing a rock at the others, and everyone's fighting and dying. And so immediately you get like the first softening, 500 AD. Then 700 years later, you get the Book of Splendor, the Book of Zohar, like my eldest daughter's name. And this is like 12th century, 13th century Spain, like Granada, and like the most romantic, sexiest place in human history. If people like know the history, it's like the Islamic conquest, and you have this beautiful architecture and a lot of trees, a lot of orchards. And then they write the Book of Splendor, which is like the most fundamental book of Kabbalah, and it's all about the female. Like 80% of the Book of Splendor is about the female side of God. The thing that was kind of hidden in the Talmud, they couldn't say it. They couldn't say, you know what? God is actually also a woman. They're saying it, and they're dedicating almost all of it to that part of God, to the female side. And they're playing with gender, and they're playing with everything. Everything becomes paradoxical. Everything becomes kind of in the darkness and light playing together. Really nice. And then in this retelling, 18th century, this is happening around Ukraine of today, you get Hasidism. And Hasidism takes the Book of Splendor, takes this thing, and internalize it, and says it's all psychology. All the stuff that's where God was described, it's actually us. And then in this retelling, 1948, the State of Israel, this was supposed to be the next step. This was supposed to be of connecting to the earth. And that either that didn't happen, or it didn't happen right, or we still have a work to do. But this is how I get to the Palestinians and what we started with. That meeting hasn't happened. We hasn't really, like after 2,000 years of not having a land and developing a whole religious spiritual system around not having a land and being disconnected from it, like this was supposed to be the next step. And then something happened. That's my pet theory around, the need to have a whole supportive system around you, the halakha thing, and that system kind of failing or not yet reaching its next phase.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving that context and history and perspective. And it brings me back to one of the very first things you said, which is that you haven't, that there's not a connection with the land as well. There's not a connection with the land. And that's that is what I'm seeing and experiencing as the feminine, is that it's the earth herself that is our body, like the body of the human is the body of the earth. And that as we reconnect to our physical bodies, right? Like as we become embodied, reconnect to the body, that we are reconnecting to the earth, and that she is deeply longing for that. And that connecting to the land is, coming, maybe in the series of retellings, when for whatever reason, after tens of thousands of years of the goddess reigning, then this other thing needed to happen. What it feels like is there's a return of the goddess that's trying to take place, and it's happening through the land and through lots of other ways, and through our bodies. Like for me, primarily, it's happening through the earth and through my body. That does seem like the next step, like the thing that's supposed to happen. And this will also be an unpopular opinion with some of my groups and circles, but like, I don't think that the deal now is that matriarchy is supposed to return. Like, I don't think the goddess now is supposed to reign. I think it has something to do with that interplay of light and dark, and the paradox and of the interplay of masculine and feminine, and that archetype that you brought up at the beginning of the conversation, this blending of the masculine and feminine, taking the best, I don't know, the best qualities of both. I don't know if that's exactly right to say, taking the essence of these two things, and it's one thing, and that's the new divine parent that we need to embody as well, so that we can do the next thing in this very bizarre human play that's happening over tens of thousands of years on this planet. And I completely agree with you. Like, I don't want to turn the last 10,000 years into a mistake either, or just a mistake. I like how you, that small correction into just, it's not just a mistake. Yeah. In my sort of worldview and cosmology, humans have done this again and again. We keep trying to come into a new way of being, and we keep, like the last fall that happened, the fall, or, that happened 10 or 15,000 years ago, that we can't really remember. We don't have a memory before that. I don't think that was the only fall that humanity has had. I think that it happens over and over again. I think we're facing another one. And I think what we really want, our collective, the collective of humanity, the collective of souls, or whatever this is, I think what we really want to do is have some sort of union between the masculine and feminine, between the either or, some sort of being able to bear being at the empty heart of paradox that kind of blows everything open, and we stand in it, and it's a whole new thing.
Yeah, being able to bear that moment is, I think, how this connects to like the first part of our conversation, and just to appreciate the difficulty of it. Like that's one of the things, reading, let's say, a yoga text, like really ancient stuff. What I always want is, it's like sort of an acknowledgement of the inner child. So for that meeting to happen between the masculine and the feminine, and for the next stage of Israel, whatever that may be, to be a good one and not make things worse. I feel that meeting needs to happen, and there needs to be an acknowledgement of the difficulties of the inner child in that meeting. Like this may be our small contribution to the traditions. Because the traditions, for, like you said, they were more connected to nature. They had other challenges in doing that. I read a neurological kind of study where they said like when ancient Buddhist texts talk about like normal breath, it's what we achieve after great sort of meditation. Their default mode was so much more relaxed. So we need to kind of address that.
And can we do that? Again, this is also linking back to the beginning of the conversation, like what's an appropriate level of connection in the midst of, either emergency or just the world as it is, just kind of the world on fire, and all the pressures that we have, and all of the things that feel like they're bubbling up. Like, what's an appropriate amount of connection? Is it possible to take a deep breath in the midst of that? Is it possible to connect with the inner child? And I just want to ask you that, like, is it, I don't know, it makes sense that we're taking shallow breaths, right?
Well, my answer is I just took a deep breath, and that was so much fun for the inner child. That was delicious, as you say. So that's all I can say.
Yeah. Yeah. I have, I don't know your like capacity or time restraints, but I do have, I have a question, and you can answer it or not. And that, that it's only if it feels safe, right, to the parts. But the question is, as you're talking about this very difficult meeting, these very difficult meetings, and I know that you have done a lot of work with the inner child and with meeting different aspects of self. And I wonder if you would be willing to describe that, to like talk about what that's like somatically. And if it's too much, just be like, no, thank you, Robin.
First of all, thank you for asking it. If we're looking for some kind of a solution, that's certainly part of it. To ask, to make sure that the other side is okay in a way that isn't kind of ceremonial and ritualistic, but like you did it, like we started with, like just being, I call it normal. It's not a good word. Just be normal and be nice. And it's so hard to reach that level. So thank you for asking. But I want to, what do you mean? Yeah, I mean, thank you for, it's true. I do try to do a lot of work with the inner child. So what is it like to work with the inner child, or what is it like to work with it right now? Or,
I keep thinking about that. It's kind of an ineffable thing that we're talking about, the difficulty of these meetings and why it's so difficult and why it sort of feels like it may overtake us or may feel like a small death or a big death, to meet something, to truly meet something. So yeah, so in that context, I think that you have developed along the path, right? So it might be hard to access the original feelings of the meeting or, just touching on why
no, it's
it's
not
so
hard.
difficult. It's
It's
not
still
that
here every day.
it's there.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's there all the time. Yeah, I tell you what came up, and it's a nice, useful thing for me right now. One of the conflicts that I used to have a lot is the conflict of the soul and the inner child. The soul, like you said, it's not necessarily just about this life. It's not necessarily just about Yoni, this body. And the soul like wants me to do stuff. To, like everyone's soul. Everyone's soul has a job for them, it seems, for the inner child, for the person in this life. And and especially when we were starting out, my initial response to those callings of the souls were, go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself for putting me in this body and in this life for your mission. And, Stuart Davis comes up a lot in this podcast, a special man. And I always tell you that I liked how he described, for him, it was like almost physical meeting with sort of insectoid alien or something like that. But I kind of took it to understand it's from the soul. And this insectoid alien tell him, look, you signed a contract before you were born to do those things. And then Stuart said, well, fuck this contract. I'm not, it wasn't me, or, there was no consent. So I don't accept it. And there was something really relieving for me to hear that sort of response. And maybe a bit of a more mature level, like not more mature than Stuart, more mature than my own sort of initial reaction, where it is today, either said, or kind of the kind of implicit deal I signed with my soul. I said, look, whatever we're doing, this needs to be good to the inner child as well. I'm not going to do anything just because it's my mission. I'm going to do it and then what I discovered, or I'm in the process of discovering, that it's the same thing. Like the thing that I understand sort of my soul wants me to do are things that would be good for the inner child as well. It's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be like the sort of stuff that he wants to do. So that's kind of what came up. That sort of new contract, kind of.
I love that. And I love, that it highlights such an important part of all of this work, which is first, fuck you. Like first and foremost, go fuck yourself. Yeah. It's like, I'm standing up now for the parts of myself that, that don't have the agency or the voice or whatever, the parts that are still really suffering. I'm standing up for that. And I'm saying, fuck you. I'm not going to do this just because you tell me to. And then, right? Like, and then something happens. I think I still get caught in this idea that I'm going to arrive somewhere and it's going to be static and still and nothing will change. But that's not the way that it works. It's like, first, fuck you. And then, and then there's this new negotiation. And I think it's what's happening with the non-human intelligence too, is like, stop doing things to us without our consent. That's a big theme when I talk to people who are having experiences, who are lifetime experiencers, It's like there was a time when there was not consent. And then that's what we're teaching them. We're teaching them, whoever they are, whatever, we know that that's not we don't know the answer to that question, but we're teaching them, yes, consent. Like that this being on this planet who didn't come from wherever and sign this soul contract has, rights and agency as well. And in my experience, my personal experience, they are respecting that. And they're saying, oh, okay, we have to figure out a different way to do this. And if we're negotiating with the soul, which might be the same thing, right? Like the ETs might be exactly the same thing,
Sure.
or if they're different. Sure. But if we're renegotiating with the soul and teaching the soul that, I think that's fantastic work to just be like, stop, because often the messages that come from the soul are the things that you're talking about in that yogic text. Like they don't include the inner child. They're just saying, go do the thing. Remember, it's all vibration. Remember that, you're always safe. So what's your problem? It's like, no, my body, my nervous system. This is so deeply important. And that's it feels like another place of meeting that you're talking about. This place of meeting these things that instead of exile, like instead of separation and cutting out and excising and exile, it's a bringing together, and it's more capacity and more space for things to integrate and come together rather than be blown apart. And that feels like the making whole of something that was broken. Another way of doing that.
Mm-hmm. You don't have to force yourself to do anything. It's supposed to be joyous.
Right.
Yeah.
How tender is it to claim joy in the midst of fucking war and suffering?
Well, while we were talking, there were actually two blasts outside, and I was looking at the time, and I was thinking, this is about their favorite time. I mean, no, usually in half an hour. But if it happens, it's fine. We just get the sirens. I go to the protected room, and it happens like right now. God's help, it won't happen too much, but like 3 times a day, 4 times a day.
Wow.
Nighttime, yeah. Yeah, but again, for me, it's that part is not that bad.
And I can see that you're okay. And of course, rising in me is a real fierce protectiveness. It's like, okay, let's wrap this up. Go to the room.
Well, there's no sirens. There were just these 2 blasts, and because the sirens, they're hyper localized. There are different neighborhoods. So sometimes you would hear a siren from another neighborhood and you say, oh, it's fine. So these were blasts. These are actually the blasts of usually of the protective rockets, the one that's supposed to intercept the other rocket. So it wasn't that nearby, probably.
Yeah. Still.
Yeah. But yeah, I think we can wrap it up. I mean, regardless.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really good to be with you. It's good to, I haven't seen you since, I haven't seen your face since all of this started. And it's really great to just see you and be with you and feel you as much as I can through these, through the screen, which I still can. I'm sure, it's not the same thing as in real life, but there is a sense of being able to feel you and feel that you're okay. And it's really good.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel that as well. But yeah, I do feel the longing of just being in the same room. And like the fantasy isn't even to interact too much, just to be in the same space.
Yeah.
Breathe the same air.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the human bodies want to do, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. We actually had, like yesterday, we were outside when the sirens went off, and then you don't have time to go to the room. So we went to a bomb shelter, and like the girls liked it. There was a lot of people, and people are always kind of, there's some camaraderie, and also like social norms are kind of relaxed. So everyone is kind of smiling, and the whole thing seems absurd. And there's something in it, like people, like there's a fire in a building and everyone runs out. Sometimes there would be some sort of easing of the social norms in that situation.
Right. That's a connect. It sounds like a connection rather than walking down the street or being in a store with people and you don't look at them or you don't interact, but there's some kind of connection happening there. Yeah.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, like we're in it together. But yeah, this is one thing we haven't talked about, like the power of violence to connect people.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately, like, yeah, a lot of the kind of differences between people go away when there's an external threat.
Right.
Suddenly people feel closer.
And it makes me think as well of the power of suffering to connect people. You know, or grief. It seems that as if someone goes through a gateway of grief, like Francis Weller says, then it feels like we join a community of humans. And it's a connection to our humanity. And it's weird that violence is too, but it is, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's the same thing, I think. Yeah, it's the superficial differences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in a way, people become more spiritual in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly in that bomb shelter, a lot of the things that, spiritual practices work so hard to achieve were achieved there. Just basic friendliness and openness and, this feeling of connection, like you said.
Very wild. Very wild. Okay, well.
Okay.
Thank you, Yoni. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Romy. Thank you. I really love you, man.
I love you too. It's
so weird, though. It's so weird. It's to love someone you've never. I mean, I know it's common these days, but I oscillate between how wonderful it is to how annoying it is that you can't.
Right. Yep. I know. I feel that. Alone in my little valley here, with all of these people that, people close to me for sure that I deeply love, but people that I love just scattered all, like Samantha, my friend, my wonderful friend, Samantha Brooks. If I could just abduct her and keep her in the dome.
That's a loaded word. Yeah.
I know it is. I used it intentionally to make Samantha nervous. Thank you again to Yoni Shadmi for sharing this time with me today. And thank you to all of you who support this podcast by leaving reviews, by sharing it in your communities. I think this is an important conversation, and I would love for it to get a wide audience. I also want to welcome all of our new listeners who have arrived recently. Thank you for being here with us. If you would like to support my work, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/Robin Lassiter. Thank you again to Morgan Jenks for our beautiful musical soundscapes. If you'd like to book a one-on-one session with me, or to find out more information about my work, about my book, Earth, a Love Story, that is now out in the world, or if you would like to share your own story, if you want to tell me about wild, weird shit that's happened to you, if you're an experiencer who wants to tell their story on or off the record, please reach out to me. For all of that and more, visit honeyheart.org.